Hello and welcome to episode 201 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, and today we are going to talk about a topic near and dear to my heart, player props. For that, I am joined by two men deep in the projection streets, deep in the spreadsheet virginity streets, deep in the prop streets. It is a legend himself, Michael Leone, and it is the newest member of our team here, Anthony Amico. Start with Leone. What's going on, buddy?
Not too much. Just got back from a golf trip where I tried to soak up some sun so I'd be a little bit less translucent for this version of the podcast. If you're watching the video, I don't know if that worked out, but I put in my best effort.
Yeah, I got no sunscreen, just full blown YOLO, zero sunscreen.
No, I'm a dude. I am a sunscreen, like 5 condom sunscreen wearer.
Amico, good afternoon. How are you, buddy?
Doing great, man. Doing great. We started football practice at the local high school, so I'm soaking up more sun probably than Michael. I gotta be the most tan spreadsheets guy on the team. That's the goal.
Yeah, I gotta ask you, what? So you coach the local high school. You obviously don't have a kid in the high school or anything. You're just like, you like to coach, you volunteer or whatever, or they pay you a little bit and you just love football, so you coach them.
Yeah, they pay me. I mean, it's the school that I teach at, so it's like it's like an extra thing. Good times.
What position or what is your specialty?
Receivers, D-backs, special teams. We're grinding.
Does your offense throw a lot? Or in my high school, their throw rate was like literally 2% at my high school.
Well, we just graduated like the best quarterback we've ever had, probably. So we were throwing a lot last year. This year we'll probably be back to like 85% run for the brand.
Wow. Congrats on the sex with the quarterback. Okay. Anyways, on today's show, we're going to talk specifically about season-long props for NFL. Normally, when we talk or we write about props on the site, it is for individual game props in NFL and NBA. And while I think it's similar, there are some differences around the season-long ones in terms of process. So we're going to go over the strat around that. We're going to understand how season-long projections work and how that intersects with props. We'll talk about some important notes for beating this market, and then we'll go over some stuff we've taken. And I just want to note that one of our goals here for this season is to place a way, way, way bigger, more emphasis on props. We're going to have a whole props team for this coming NFL season, and Amico and Leone are going to be part of that as well, as long with myself. And so I'm excited about that. Stay tuned for more details on that. Before we get into it, I want to remind everyone this show is indeed brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy. Best way to get ready for DFS season, aka the best season, is to be in the real money best ball streets, and Underdog undoubtedly has the best platform for that. If you're a draft kit or bundle subscriber, you get $10 free on Underdog. New players get $35. Head to the best ball tab on the site and go to how to claim your Underdog credit for instructions. Okay. Season long props. First thing I want to discuss is projections. Leone, why don't you walk the people through our process for season long projections and how it differs from the process for DFS projections?
Yeah, it's a little more conservative than DFS projections because we know over the course of an NFL season, like there's going to be a lot of chaos, right? There's going to be injuries, busts, breakouts, and whatnot. Whereas for DFS, going into a specific week, we feel pretty good that Julio Jones and AJ Brown are going to see 55% of the team's targets. Like just based on what they've done, they're healthy going into the week. We can project that going into this season. We will probably dial that back a little bit. We know that just due to blowouts too and injuries that some of these other guys are going to get volume. So quite often we actually have like over 100% of the team's market share of targets projected, and then we scale it down. And that's like how we end up conservative. So if we have 105% targets, then we'll scale that down to 100%. So it all nets out. And the numbers work nicely, and it ends up being a little bit more conservative. Zooming out a bit more, I should also note that it's less matchup driven, of course. We don't try to go too crazy. Defense year over year really isn't super stable, so we don't go too crazy with the schedule. The one thing I'll do, and Jack Miller's helped me out with this, some of the books, and even some of the good books, they'll have projected spreads for every week of the NFL season. So we can kind of get a sense of what a team's average team total is going to be, what their average game script's going to be based on the spread. So that'll feed into the team play calling, the team scoring. stuff. So that's important. But we just want to get a sense of like, how many plays is the team going to run? How do we divvy that up between pass run? And then when we divvy that up between pass run, we start implementing percentage shares based on rush attempts, targets, pass attempts, what have you. And then we're doing some sort of efficiency adjustments for players based on, some off-season work I've done, like how much regression we layer in. If a guy's had 11, yards per catch the last 3 years, like what should it really be? And then it kind of all comes together. And that's the long-winded way of how we do our season-long projections and help to pump those into the ETR rankings.
It strikes me, Amico, that our weekly rankings are going to be way tighter in range of outcomes than the season-long ones. Like projecting a full season is so hard because there's going to be so much that happens over the course of a 17-game season. It's really hard to project. As Leone said, in a given week, we can be way, way, way more accurate. Do you agree with that, Amico? And how does that change how you think about props from season-long versus weekly?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And, if we're thinking about our projection as the median or the most likely outcome, I think it's important to remember that the range of outcomes for most players, maybe quarterbacks would be like the closest to a normal distribution, but even them, most players are going to skew left, so in other words, they're going to tend to the under. It's going to be probably worse than what we project because of injuries, because of, playing time variation. And just because of the kinds of players that are being posted, right? I mean, like your favorite zero running back candidate is not going to have a player prop. It's going to be all these guys that are presumed to be full starters. So we look at like the available pool of players that we have to bet on, the available, information that we have on how these players tend to work out. The chaos of the season is going to create a lot more under equity over the course of the season.
Yeah, and we're going to talk more about that in a minute. I know there's always a debate, Leone, about projections versus rankings, right? And one reason we don't publish the season-long projections is because people take them as rankings when they shouldn't. There is a lot more nuance that goes into rankings. You can't just take a season-long projection and make that your draft board. I don't think, at least. But Leone, how do you think about this whole debate between projections versus rankings?
Yeah, it's difficult. Sometimes if you're just using like the base case of projections, like you end up, a 1% target share could shift a guy, 8 spots in rankings. Like it's because over an entire season, that could be a decent amount of targets. But obviously we're not that accurate enough to know if it should be 24% or 25% for wide receiver A. So you do want to have an open mind and realize like where it's fragile, where it's not. And one of the things that I do is I bake in like an upside scenario for players. So Russell Gage, for example, for Atlanta, we have him in his upside scenario, like not that much different than his base case, right? Like he's going to play this slot role. He's going to see a certain amount of targets. Even if Ridley goes down, he's not the type of player that can fill a ton of targets. Whereas you have someone like Antonio Brown for Tampa Bay. If Chris Godwin or Mike Evans goes down, Antonio Brown's targets could skyrocket from what his base case is. So we do want to layer that in. And similar for running backs, it helps with those running backs that have upside, like a Tony Pollard behind Ezekiel Elliott. It might not be a huge probability hits his upside case, but he's one of the guys we know if Zeke gets hurt, like it's wheels up for Tony Pollard. It's going to be an absolute boss of a season for him. So layering that in along with the base scenario really helps on the rankings front to get away from drafting the guys that have like these okay projections, but they're not going to really have a meaningful fantasy season. They're not going to be league winners, especially in managed leagues, and then pushing a little bit more towards the guys that have like maybe a little bit worse projection, but if things break right, they can have like a super meaningful impact on your team's win rate.
Yeah, I think that makes sense a lot. And along those lines, like, let's think about this. I think all of us, I'm not sure, but I think all of us bet the Derrick Henry under 1,600.5 yards on DraftKings back on June 17th. But, Amico, in our projection, we had Derrick Henry projected for 1,794.2 yards as his projection. I'm almost never during the regular season betting something that is that far over our projection, taking under on something that's far over our projection. I thought it was right on season long for a lot of reasons that we're going to get into. But are you following what I'm saying here, where it's a bit counterintuitive, where we can have a guy projected for more than his total, but the under is still a good bet And I think you're on the Derrick Henry thing. I think you found even a better line than the 1600. But yeah, what do you think about that?
No, I totally agree. I mean, that's kind of what we're trying to do is take advantage of the chaos that can happen over the course of the season. I mean, we might project some of these players for more yards than the line and still go under just because, the number of different things that can happen over the season to impact Derrick Henry's totals. More of those things are going to be negative and more of those things are going to keep him from meeting that number. I mean, it could be as simple as, them just not playing a game, like if they have something clinched up at the end of the year, they sit out a week, guy gets hurt, guy comes out for a few series even. I mean, those little things add up over the course of a year.
Yeah. I mean, to be clear, Leone, we're projecting Derrick Henry and all these guys to play in roughly 17 games, right? And so that's kind of where some of the disconnect is with these props, right?
Yeah, like I said, we're a little bit conservative sometimes with the overall volume in terms of breaking down the actual shares, but that is in part because we are aggressive on the games played. We don't do a lot of stuff with, Will Fuller's injury prone. We're going to knock, we try not to do too much. There might be some guys that are aging a little bit that we might pull back the target share a little bit more, but we're generally not projecting full games missed unless it's like a known thing, a known injury heading into the season, a known suspension, that type of thing. So we're generally like a little bit hot, even though we're conservative on the target share because we're optimistic on the games. It kind of nets out slightly optimistic in the total range of outcomes.
And I think maybe the market's catching on to this, but people still aren't. Like, trying to project injuries is just such a crazy thing. When guys come in healthy to the year, I mean, that was really the only, if Will Fuller didn't have an injury history last year, he legit would have gone in the third round. You could have gotten him 6th, 7th, 8th round, 9th round this time last year. I mean, it was just such a print fest. All you have to do is say, hey, we are not that good at projecting injuries. And the data shows that we're not when guys come into the year healthy. Okay. Let's get a little bit process stuff here, Amico. So in NFL markets like sides and totals, maybe across, you could have access to 20 books. Maybe you get a half point of delta. Maybe like one book has 3.5, one book has 4, maybe if you're lucky. But in props, I mean, it is absolutely insane how far some books are off from one another. So in my opinion, if you're serious about this, if you're serious about betting props season long or weekly, and you do not have money on every single site that offers props, you're just not doing it right. So Amico, what is your process for line shopping this stuff? We'll talk mostly about season long now. We'll do another podcast closer to season, talk about line shopping for weekly. But for season long right now, what's the process for looking for the best possible lines and picking off some bad numbers? I know you're in New Jersey, which is probably the best. Brent, New Jersey and Colorado, I would say, are probably the best right now in terms of number of books available.
Yeah, I mean, it's the Mecca right now. Like I literally have money on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 different sports books. Like, and I just keep them pulled up all day. Like I just have a Chrome tab. I'm sure that the computer degenerates are yelling at their screen, yelling at their phone because I just keep this stuff up all the time. Like I just never close it. And anytime something comes up, I'm pretty much just refreshing, looking, comparing the lines when I get the best number. And we're comparing that to the projections to see, how close we are. If something's even or a little under, we're definitely smashing the under. I think pretty much like if we're looking at, I think Taylor said this in Slack the other day, which is a very good point. Like if you're taking a bunch of bets on the season long side that you think are coin flips, like you're going to come up on the right side of those coin flips more often than not, just because of the way that we're projecting these things, the way they're comparing them. If we're projecting players to play 17 games, like it's very likely that they won't. So if we're shopping that across 6 books and we're finding the best line and we're coming within like 5 or 10%, under is going to be a really good bet.
Yeah. And so like there's such wide gap in some of these season long ones. Like there's actual middle opportunities. Like I think like Josh Allen's passing yard prop opened up with like an 800 point spread across 800 yard spread across 2 different books. I mean, you could easily go for middles if you want, or you can just pick off the higher line and take the under there. I think there's certain books that I look for that may be a little bit softer that typically have further off from market, like BetMGM and Bet365 and stuff like that. Have you noticed, Amico, any that are just like, man, we need to check this book first because they're laying some soft numbers?
Yeah, always Bet365, MGM, and Fox have been the 3 that I think I get the best lines at. I mean, DraftKings and FanDuel are the most widely available, but kind of as a result, they have the best information and they're putting out kind of the best lines in most cases.
Well, one thing I would say about DraftKings and FanDuel, their menu, at least in season, is massive, and credit to them for putting it up. And B, like, a lot of these books are going to limit you very quickly if you have like any pulse on props. Like, you're getting limited very quickly. In my experience, like, DraftKings and FanDuel have still let people get 200, 250, and maybe they'll cap it out there. But I know it doesn't sound like a lot maybe to a lot of people, but for props, like, that's not bad. And so credit to DraftKings and FanDuel for having a big menu and also allowing people to bet, reasonable 200, 250. Have you noticed that at all, Amico, as you've been firing at these?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I can get more than like $3 down at MGM. So
Yeah.
the limits are definitely way different. I mean, I think FanDuel's only maybe limited me like once or twice, and I'm pretty much betting pretty similarly across everyone. So like you said, shout out to them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And like I said, like, we're not going to get rich here, but one of the reasons that it's so soft is because they're not allowing people to bet 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 on these. If you only allow people to bet 200 or 300, well, you can have this as kind of a marketing thing. And people like it, and I like it. It's fun. Okay. Let's talk some more about this under stuff, Leone, because people hate to hear it. People don't like betting unders, but man, on season long props, my God. And there's a few reasons why. I think for weeklies for a second, I think the median versus mean stuff is a conversation worth having. In other words, books are so often using seasonal averages for their weekly props, but the seasonal average does not take into account that Mo Alley-Cox had like one game of 90 yards, but 6 games of 15 or less. And it also doesn't take into context that maybe when Mo Alley-Cox had that 90-yard game, Jack Doyle was hurt. And to me, that's the main case for unders in weekly. I want to get to the case for underdog and unders in season long in a second, but unders in weekly, Leone, I think mean versus median is the most important thing. Anything else on the weekly is why we lean unders so heavy.
Yeah, I mean, when you get to the guys like Travis Kelce and whatnot that have really high yardage props, their distributions are a little bit more normal, meaning the mean and median are a little bit closer. But again, it's kind of that 50-50 thing Amico said. Like, if the line's 50-50, there's still like more things that can probably go wrong for Travis Kelce that aren't being baked into the line, whether it's an in-game injury, blowout, that type of thing. And then the players like Marquez Valdes-Scantling just sticks out as a guy who, randomly he'll have 3 for 100, but then he'll have some games where he catches, 1 or 2 short passes, and that's it. The guys with the lower yardage props generally have the bigger disparity between their mean and median projection, because they'll have, especially guys with like a high ADOT, like they'll have, again, if they're taking their seasonal averages for receiving, they have such a high yards per catch that there's just a lot more variance in that. And when they're going over, they might be beating the over by a lot, but they're going under more frequently.
Okay. For the purpose of today, though, I want to talk about season long. I mean, my God, think about all the ways a season long can go under. Injuries, rest, loss of role. Role wasn't what we expected in the first place. A preseason injury, a preseason signing that changes usage, an in-season signing that changes usage. It's just really hard for the books to make these numbers low enough, especially at running back and wide receiver. Maybe quarterback because their injury rate is less. Maybe you can make a case there, but for running back, wide receiver, tight end, it's just really hard for the books to make it low enough. I don't know, Leone, is there anything I'm missing there? It just seems like I'm like in pain to take it over on these season long props.
Yeah. I mean, I know T.Y. Hilton's an example of one of the first season long prop bets, I think, that we listed all off season. And I forgot the exact number. I think it was his catches was in the low 60s.
64 and a half catches. Yeah.
I mean, our stuff's a little conservative and we have him like barely at 50 catches, but that's just an example of a bet where he can play 17 games and not hit it, right? We can make a decent argument for him not hitting it, for being a coin flip, maybe even being slightly on our side, but even let's say it's 50-50 over 17 games, the things that can go wrong, Paris Campbell, Michael Pittman are there. It's a new quarterback. It's a run-heavy offense. It's very spread out target shares in this offense. And you can tell yourself a lot of ways that this goes wrong for T.Y. Hilton before even factoring in a bit more of the age model and injury stuff. And that's just why we really like unders, because we feel pretty confident we're not getting a bad line, right? Like and the overs, you have to be a bit more careful, where it's a little easier to fall into a trap, so to speak, because these hidden, like unseen edges generally push things under. There's less of them that push things over. We do want to be aware of, younger players that could break out and see bigger roles and where we're susceptible there. But Hilton's a great example of an aging player in an kind of an uncertain spot where all the things that seem like they could break differently than you're expecting, most of them would break negatively and not positively.
Yeah, and just like specifically on TY, I think they're going to play a pretty heavy rotation again at wide receiver. Would surprise me if TY Hilton was playing like 95% of the snaps. Other one that we took, Amico, was the Kadarius Toney under 535 yards. I think that was on Fox Bet at -110. Obviously, Kadarius Toney enters the year with a very uncertain role. We did take an over, though, and I want to touch on this for a second because I just got done with this rant about how it pains me to take overs, but I did take one. I think you took it too, Amico. It was Rondale Moore over 500.5 receiving yards. And God, I as I was like taking it, I was like, God, this is so bad. But I think Rondale Moore is going to play the Larry Fitzgerald role, which yielded 5.5 targets per game last year, except Rondale Moore is actually going to be productive for him, like in the horizontal raid, throw it horizontally to Rondale Moore, let him do stuff after the catch. I think he's going to be really effective. I think he's going to be more effective than Christian Kirk. But again, we are projecting a role here. That said, 500.5 is very low for a player in this offense. Kadarius Toney, 535.5. He could be the number 4 wide receiver, maybe number 5 option in the pass game behind Evan Ingram as well. So that's my case for the over. I'm embarrassed to say that I took an over, though. Amico, it's kind of humiliating. Do you want to talk specifically about the Rondale Moore bet?
Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, with these younger players and a lot of times the rookies, like the books are just not factoring in the context. Like they're not grinding the athletic and the news to figure out like what these guys' roles are. They're just looking at, historical averages for rookie receivers, maybe based on draft round, but like that's it. So that's why you get guys like Toney and Moore who have, basically the same receiving prop, despite having like vastly different roles. I mean, Moore in an offense that's going to be as up-tempo and pass-heavy as Arizona can be, and in the role that we're projecting, like, I mean, he could play 10 games and get there. So those are situations like, I mean, to take an over, I know it kills you to do, but it's like some of these over situations, it's like if the gap is like 30% or something from what we think is what we're projecting or what we think is reasonable, like that's a situation we take an over. But it definitely has to be, I like to think of it as just like shaving a few games off. Like, if this guy plays 12 games, is he going to get there? And if so, then I'm thinking more about the over.
Yeah. Go ahead, Leone.
I just want to jump in too. I think, and Amico kind of hit on this, but some of these books seem like there's making their initial lines off historical stuff. So they're looking at the draft position of Toney and Rondale Moore, and they have similar lines. But when you really look at it, like the type of players they are and the competition in front of them, in Kadarius Toney, his bull case for percentage of targets is almost Rondale Moore's base case for percentage of targets. And again, when you ask me about season-long projections, Rondale Moore is a guy that has a pretty big gap between what we have his base projection at, which isn't that much over the over. It's a little scary if you're just looking at that. We've got him at 550 receiving yards, but he could see, and that's with a low teens target share, though, in an offense, as Amico said, runs a lot of plays. Like he can get there with a pretty obvious target share that we're expecting there. But then the bull case for him is he sees like 20% of the team's targets. Like he's a clear number 2, and they just get him the ball in the short area of the fields so much. And in those bull cases, he's hitting it every time outside of injury.
Speaking of overs, we got a question from someone about Clyde Edwards-Helaire. This one is up on DraftKings right now, I believe 850.5 rushing yards. I wasn't even really tempted to take this one. I like Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm not sure that his role was secure enough for an over the course of a 17-game season, though. I don't feel strongly about it, though. It does seem pretty low for someone in the Chiefs offense. Did you see that one, Amico? Do you have any thoughts for the people on the CEH over under 850.5 rush yards?
Yeah, I mean, I honestly think that line's like kind of right. Like I don't see like a huge gap between that and like what is reasonable outcome. I mean, I think the reason that we like a guy like Clyde Edwards-Helaire in fantasy is because of what we think the receiving production could be in a good offense, what the touchdown production could be in a good offense. I don't know if like the Chiefs are going to run the ball enough and specifically run the ball with one back to get there in a bunch of cases. And then you obviously include a bunch of the injury stuff with running back. That's kind of a pass for me.
Yeah. Leone, I think, likes an over, though. Embarrassing. This is humiliating, Leone. I think Leone likes Baker Mayfield over 3,850.5 passing yards. And Leone's apparently not alone. Leone must be telling other people because now the over is minus 124 on DraftKings. Leone, this is kind of embarrassing, but I think
I don't like this line movement.
For the quarterback position, though, it's clear the injury rates are lower. Does that make you change anything when you look at the quarterback totals for these season-long props?
As embarrassing as it is to take an over, I do think this is a case where the lines are just set based on Baker Mayfield's last 3 seasons. Like the line of 3,800 yards is basically where he's been at each of his first 3 seasons. And I think there's a lot of reasons we should expect him to exceed those expectations. The first reason, and I've written about this in regards to the Browns as like a sneaky stack in best ball, is their pass rate over expectation at the end of the season last year, the last handful of games going into the playoffs, was a lot higher than when they were crazy run heavy to start the year. And then they were crazy run heavy in the middle of the year because they played in some insane weather games that even with the bad weather in Cleveland are unlikely to repeat. So it's a team that runs a lot of plays. So if they shift their pass rate from, mid 50% to about 60%, which still isn't that high, I think the attempts are going to be there. I think he's got efficiency out second year in this offense with Stefanski. He's historically he was like a really good quarterback prospect, number 1 pick overall, had an awesome rookie year. And then just with like some organizational issues, took a big step back, disappointing second season. So I just think there's outs in a lot of different ways. And even if he just plays healthy 17 games, he's been there each of his first 3 seasons. Like he would have been over with that 17th game, not by a lot, granted, but so I think it's more than 50-50 he gets there in a healthy season. I think he could miss 1 or 2 games and still beat this over. I've got him, eclipsing 4,000 yards, maybe more like 4,200 yards this year.
Yeah. Do you think Baker is going to have a good season? Do you think that they will pass the ball maybe a little bit more than they did last year? Last 2 things I want to talk about, Amico, are these running back lines that on first glance look really low. And this is where I don't think books are out to trap people, but these are like trappy kind of lines. Joe Mixon, 1,000.5 rushing yards. Najee Harris, 1,000.5 rushing yards as their total. And people are like, oh my God, Najee Harris is going to get 350 carries. How is he not going to get to 1,000 yards? Oh my God, Joe Mixon is such a great talent. They are featuring him even more this year. How is he not going to go over 1,000 yards? For a lot of the reasons we already talked about is why I'm afraid to take stuff like this. But I can just feel people being like, oh my God, easy. Najee Harris over 1,000, easy. Joe Mixon over 1,000. How do you think about these kind of high usage running back spots? Because this isn't like the CEH one. Like Mixon and Najee Harris, I think have very, very, very solid roles.
Yeah, it's kind of like the number one thing you see on Twitter. Like if you just talk to your friends about some of these props, they just be like Joe Mixon only 1,100 yards. Like he's gonna blow right by that. And that's a big product of that is people just thinking about these things still. Assuming health, and like the books don't give you like an out if guys miss games. So running backs with the injury rates, again, like I it's perfectly fine to just not bet. Like I'd rather no bet a total that I think can go over at running back, than to take that over and have to stomach the injury and the loss and all that stuff. Because a guy like Harris, let's say, he could have really poor efficiency behind a bad offensive line. His role could be a little bit smaller than we think. There are some other ways that he can miss without injury. And then obviously you factor that stuff in and you're like, okay, well, this is actually just not a great bet. So, I think some of those like more trappy lines that look like clear overs at running back, those are to me, just no bets. They're not bets that I'm looking to take.
Yeah, for sure. There is I want to say limited, but there's a smallish menu of these season long props up right now. I am going over them when they come out with our props team and posting them. If you have our draft kit, which is just $35, you have access to everything that I've taken so far and our team thinks is good so far. And I'll continue to post those as more and more get released. I think as we get closer to the season, we'll see a ton more. So if you're interested, go ahead and check that out in the draft kit. I enjoyed this. Hope you guys did as well. Driving across the country tomorrow. Me, Jerry, and the open road. 2 best friends and the open road for roughly 24 hours of driving. So just 1 podcast this week for you all. Hope you enjoyed it. For producer Luke, for Amico, for Leone, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.